Okay, Julie, good to see you.
Oh, it's so good to see you.
Okay, so we have this chance for voters to learn more about why the county attorney's office is so important, as we all know, and also who are the attorneys that are stepping forward to lead. So what we'll do at this time is I will ask you a set of questions that we're asking all the candidates, but we'll start by giving you a chance to introduce yourself to the voters who have tuned in. Why do you want to lead the county attorney's office, and what your leadership means?
Sure. Well, welcome voters who are tuning in. My name is Julie Gunnigle. I was born, raised, and educated in the Valley. I am a mom of three, and I am a former prosecutor of politicians. I hold a BS in chemistry from NAU and a law degree with honors from Notre Dame. And I started out my career as a small town prosecutor. I was later tapped to join the Financial Crime and Public Corruption Unit in Cook County, where I prosecuted politicians and corporations who broke the law and stole taxpayer money. I'm going on my 14th year of practice this year, and I am more devoted than ever to the causes related to justice. But I came to running for office, and I came to meet January in a very different way. You see, I have a child who is not neurotypical, but is also profoundly gifted. And when we put him in school here, the very same preschools and public schools that I attended as a child, I quickly discovered how under-resourced Arizona had become. After he'd been to 9 different schools before second grade, we realized that the education system here isn't what it once was, and that Arizona had stopped investing in its people. So, I mean, together we went down to the Capitol, we sat in hearings, we marched with the teachers, and what I discovered was that Arizona has changed. Our legislature can openly vote money into their own pockets. They can vote on legislation that impacts companies that they own, and they do it with legal impunity. I don't believe that we have placed the emphasis that we should on fighting public corruption. And moreover, we haven't done enough to combat the corruption and, by extension, the racial disparities that destroy lives inside our criminal justice system. Make no mistake about it, there is big money in hate, and for years, the private prison industry has worked to keep Arizonans, and particularly Arizonans of color, locked up. I believe that the state should fund public school instead of private prison, that we should put education and families first, but that we can't get there and do lasting criminal justice reform without addressing first the corruption in our system. I do hope that you'll learn more about me and my platform. Please visit Gunnigle2020.com or on Twitter at Julie Gunnigle. I'm so pleased to be able to share my platform with you.
Thanks, Julie, for the introduction. So we're going to talk about 4 different topics that hopefully will give voters an idea of why the Maricopa County Attorney's position is so important, and why, when we have this opportunity to bring in new leadership, that we want to know, what priorities are people coming in with. And so the first question is about plea policies. We know that here at the Maricopa County Attorney's Office, there are many different, very strict plea policies that are in place in terms of how cases are handled. Based on your interaction with prosecutors and defense attorneys and judges and others, tell us about 3 plea policies that you feel are most important to review for urgent change. And what result do you think changing those policies will have for the county?
Oh, January, that is such a good question. Plea policies are at the heart of criminal justice reform. So for those who might not understand why, we live in a state that has moved toward mandatory minimum sentences and has adopted a policy deceptively named truth in sentencing. And this has served to shift the power from judges and prosecutors, from judges to the prosecutors in our system. So for those who have never experienced our criminal justice system, it is so tempting to think of it as a defense attorney going up against a prosecutor and a judge at the top overseeing all of it to make sure that justice is done. But that's not how it works. Mandatory minimums take a lot of that power from the judges and they give it to prosecutors such that the outcome of a case is really determined at charging rather than, during discovery or trial. So first, I believe that we should address mandatory minimums in pleas by charging around those minimums, by creating diversion programs that provide treatment in lieu of a conviction. And it's also a way of directing people to rehabilitation rather than to costly incarceration programs that don't make us any safer. Secondly, we need to get rid of the trial tax. Our justice system, as you know, is based around the idea that people are able to test the government's evidence at trial. And it used to be true that between 5 or 10% or more of all the cases in our criminal justice system went to trial. But now that number is closer to 1%. And it's because this office uses what's called a trial tax. That is, prosecutors will argue for a longer, harsher sentence if they obtain a conviction by a trial rather than by plea. And it drives up the risk to defendants not to go to trial, and it forces pleas. Third, I believe we need to eliminate cash bail. And I know that this is not, strictly speaking, a plea policy, but being held on unattainable cash bail is the greatest predictor of whether or not someone will plead guilty and receive a longer sentence. We know that cash bail doesn't serve the purposes for which it was intended. That is, securing attendance at future court dates. Instead, it punishes poverty and it destroys lives. At 24 hours, someone who is held on unattainable cash bail is likely to lose their job. At a week, they're likely to lose their housing, and at months, they lose their family. I am committed to stop asking for cash bail. And if someone presents that real risk of flight or danger if released, then present that evidence and get detention orders rather than asking for unattainable cash bail. I am moved by the morality of plea reform, as I believe that these policies that drive Arizona to be the 5th largest incarcerator in our country and 8th largest in the world. But if you're not moved by the humanity of this situation, consider being moved by the cost. Our incarceration machine costs $1.2 billion per year, and it doesn't make us safer. I think it is well past time to get our priorities straight and to reinvest in Arizona. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. Talking about a different way that the Maricopa County Attorney's Office impacts families, students, all of us in Maricopa County is the juvenile justice system. When it comes to the juvenile justice, I don't think it gets enough attention, the role that the county attorney's office can play. And
I think you're right.
Work in that space, serving a lot of juveniles. So tell us about, it plays a role in this school to prison pipeline that we hear so much about, that everyone knows there's something not right about that happening. What can you do as the county attorney to reduce fines and fees imposed on juveniles and families, the system overall, and specifically also, what do you see changing regarding the prosecution of minors in adult court, the way that we currently do it in Maricopa County?
I am so glad that we are talking about this. Let's start with the school to prison pipeline, because the truth of the matter is that it's a misnomer. It doesn't start in schools. It starts in birth with our maternal health care crisis, our non-existent parental leave, our under-resourced early childhood education programs, our lack of a social safety net, such that by the time a child arrives at one of our abysmally underfunded public schools, they're already deep within the pipeline. And this is equally true with the foster care to prison pipeline. So to answer your question, here's how a reform-minded county attorney can help. First, we can create restorative justice practices that address the harm that's caused to people and relationships and to the community, but also redirect youth out of the criminal justice system. These programs, when they are run well, are positively transformational. They reduce fines and fees, and they focus on undoing the harm and healing the child rather than punishment. Secondarily, when prosecutors have discretion, we can and should stop charging juveniles as adults. We know now more than ever how brains develop and how morally and now scientifically unjust those policies are. Additionally, we shouldn't be ever arguing for a juvenile life without parole. And I believe our prosecutors' offices should support those who are currently serving those sentences to be resentenced. And then last, people tend to forget that a reform-minded county attorney can also be an advocate down at the legislature. And I personally would be an advocate for raise the age legislation. That would be legislation that keeps juveniles in the juvenile system rather than the adult system for longer, to give more options for rehabilitation rather than incarceration. I also believe that too many Arizona students are in schools without nurses, without counselors, without other support. So districts should take a hard look at how they are policing students rather than teaching discipline and skills, and reconsider their use of SROs. It's also an education issue. There's a sad fact that 15% of all Americans are dyslexic, but nearly half of everyone who's incarcerated are. If we invested in education and OT in particular, and invested in these kids, we could all have a better outcome. My plans frees up about $250 million a year by divesting in incarceration. And while our county attorney doesn't get to spend that money, I would advocate for significant reinvestment in our schools and communities. There was a time where I taught in our 2 juvenile detention facilities. At that time, a majority of the children detained not only had that delinquency case, but also had a dependency case, meaning that their parents were alleged to not be fit or able to take care of them. And I remember one of those students asking me about the path to becoming an attorney. And he got elbowed so quickly by one of his friends who told him to shut up because he would never be going to school. And my point is that children in custody know from a very young age that they will not have the opportunity that so many others enjoy. As a mom, it is absolutely heartbreaking to see that someone who should have their entire life in front of them has already believed, for a good reason, that there is no hope. So we need to do better, and I'm committed to doing better.
Thank you, Julie. Let's talk about, some of the things that frustrate us about the justice system as it exists all over, but, particularly here in Maricopa County. We don't always have enough data, or if it's there, we don't hear enough about it. So tell us more about, how would you use data to help problem solve? How would you use data to identify and address racial disparities in sentencing, in charging, in who's coming in the door? How would you use data to address unlawful use of force? All these issues out there where, data can be powerful. Tell us about, if you were leading the county attorney's office, how would you do that?
My goodness, this really should be a couple-hour discussion, but let me see if I can do it in 3 minutes. First, I envision a county that ensures justice for all and respects the dignity of every person. And the racism that is in our criminal justice system is undeniable. At every stage of our system, we know that Black and Brown and Indigenous people are treated differently. This isn't an issue for which there are both sides. It is undeniable, it is wrong, it needs to stop. So my platform has a detailed plan of how to make it happen, and data plays a big part. So first, I want everyone watching to recognize that when cases get charged from this office, to this day, there is a box for an attorney to check that contains a slur for an undocumented person accused of a crime. So we should begin with race and ethnicity blind charging as a matter of principle. But I also don't think we should pretend that that solves the problem, because our problems are structural and they're deeply baked into the system. So it is my priority to be radically transparent and to open the books on this historically secretive office. And I am committed to using the Vera Institute model, which I know you're familiar with. It's nationally recognized as both a leading practice and one of the fastest routes to equity in prosecution. It involves opening the books on the office and addressing trends within the office, and doing it all under the supervision and with the involvement of the community. So to give you an example, we know that Black Arizonans are 3.9 times more likely to be convicted of marijuana possession than a white Arizonan. So from there, our solution is to stop charging low-level marijuana offenses. But there are trends in this office that we don't even know are happening because we're not looking for them. So for example, one office that went through this process opened their books and they discovered that for resisting arrest, for example, a shocking 77% of those who were charged were Black. And I believe that this office, if it's going to be explicitly anti-racist, that we only get there when we are looking for these trends, and then we can meaningfully make policy that will address them. So additionally, these disparities are not just in who we charge, but they're also in who we choose to believe. So and the same jurisdiction that I've been talking about that opened their books found that when a person who has experienced domestic violence is a person of color, that prosecutors were less likely to charge the perpetrator when they were white, and especially so in these crimes of domestic violence. So tangentially, so when we get to police use of force cases, it's a different but very related problem. This office does publicly track use of force callouts, but it has only charged one officer in the last several years. And this was during an era where Phoenix had the highest rate of police shootings in the entire nation. So I am committed to the creation of an independent unit that will evaluate use of force cases with community involvement and apart from the conflict of interest that's really inherent in that relationship between prosecutors and law enforcement. So in short, we have a system that is made up of humans, and those humans carry bias. We know that data is the key to getting in and addressing these racial disparities, but we need courageous and transparent leadership if we're going to get it done.
Thank you, Julie. So the last question is going to a completely different part of the office, but one that doesn't get enough visibility, the civil division. The Maricopa County Attorney's Office has a civil division as well. Tell us more about your priority objectives for the civil division.
Yes, and to push back, it's not that the civil division doesn't get visibility, it's also that it's been routinely ignored and has been historically a place where the friends of the county attorney serve. But no, make no mistake about it, this part of the office is really important because it affects county residents' day-to-day lives. Issues that are essential to the functioning of democracy, for example, like elections, public records requests, open meeting laws, those all come through the civil division. When a corporation breaks environmental laws, the enforcement action comes through the civil division. When a county agency gets sued, it comes through this portion of the office. So specifically, looking at the civil division and its organization, the different practice groups that are therein, the grouping it doesn't make sense to me. I have run both a legal clinic and my own law firm and have more civil experience than anyone else running. And I can tell you that structuring practice groups around subject matter would make this part of the office so much more efficient and would promote the institutional knowledge that is so key when you're out there advising clients. But more to your point, when you have an office that has been both politicized and ignored, it's fair to see why morale in that portion of the office would be low. And my commitment to the attorneys of this office is to make the Maricopa County Attorney's Office the best place to serve in the county. I got into prosecution because I believe in public service. In particular, I was driven because I watched friends and family report intimate partner violence and sexual assault and get referred into like bureaucratic oblivion. And I want those who share that heart for public service to be in a workplace that's better, a workplace where sexual harassment isn't tolerated, where there is equal pay for equal work, where leaders are promoted based on merit and not friendship, where their bureau chiefs are as diverse as the community that we serve, and where they're supported to do that truly excellent work and believe that their work has meaning and has purpose. So those are my priorities for the civil division and for the office writ large.
Thank you, Julie. I think it's important for everyone to have the chance to hear, what your leadership means for the county attorney's office. I'm glad we had the chance to discuss this, and I know you now have a couple of minutes yourself to sum up, why this matters.
Yeah, so Thank you so much for this opportunity today. Again, my name is Julie Gunnigle. Come visit me on my website and read more about how the county attorney's office can better serve you and can better serve the residents of Maricopa County by being, smarter and more fair. This office is really the most important office when it comes to effective public service and equity. And at this moment, we need someone there who is committed to removing the racial disparities that exist in prosecution, to making sure that simple reforms like stopping charging marijuana, ending cash bail, stop charge stacking within this office, and a host of the other criminal justice issues that, frankly, we just don't have time to get into today, are all placed front and center. I want people to realize the power that this office holds, because there's many issues in criminal justice that have to go through the legislature, and that's a good discussion to have, whether it's we creating expungement statutes or end mandatory minimums. But there are things that this office can do by virtue of policy on day one that can reduce our incarceration rate, that can prioritize crimes of violence, crimes that target women, children, and our seniors, and that target public corruption. We just need someone in this office who has the political will to do it. As an experienced prosecutor, I believe that I'm the person who can best address the systemic inequities that are in this system and hold those in power responsible, not just when they create systems like our private prison and school to prison pipeline, but when they steal our public funds. And that is the way that we have to address some of the systemic problems in Arizona, because we're never going to have the kind of education, the kind of public health, the kind of healthcare and infrastructure investment until we address the corruption that happens in our county. So please visit me at gunnigle2020.com, reach out on Facebook or Twitter. I am so happy to answer your questions. And January, I am so grateful for all the leadership that you've given to Arizona on so many of these issues.
Thank you, Julie.